Welcome to lecture 2 for topic 1. And in this lecture, we're going to take a look at the different key terms that we're going to be using throughout the course of the semester. So what are we going to be covering in this lecture? Well, we're going to do a quick primer on terms we'll be using this semester. We're going to be defining what we mean by biological sex, gender identity, gender roles and gender expectations, and sexual orientation. Okay, so that's what we've got on the docket for what we're going to be learning in this lecture. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, the first term we are going to explore is biological sex. What biological sex is the anatomical and genetic characteristics that are associated with the categories of maleness or femaleness. And so humans are born with specific anatomy. And so usually if you are XX, which is the chromosomes of a female, that you are born with a vagina. If you are XY, you are born with a penis and testicles, and with XX, vagina and ovaries. And so, that is sort of the genetic and anatomical mix. And so that humans attach a designation to that anatomy and genetics. And so male or female designation is often associated with the biological sex. So, people are assigned a sex at birth. If you're born with a penis, you're assigned male at birth. If you're born with a vagina, you are assigned female at birth. And I don't think that they do like a genetic analysis of your chromosomes when you are born. They're just sort of saying, what are your parts? And that's what you get assigned. I guess you could say that's a social construct. I mean, it's not a social construct that people have certain chromosomes and have certain organs, but I guess you could say that it's somewhat of a social construct that you take that anatomy and place it in a category. But that's the way that at least humans in the United States do it. With intersex, that intersex generally means that a person is born with physical characteristics that don't fit into the binary notion of male and female bodies. Okay. And so, from a genitals perspective, some people are born with, both a penis and a vagina. You might be born with a vagina, but you might have testicles within inside your body. That chromosomes can be something beyond XX and XY. It could be XXY, etc. And so some humans are born without these sort of binary anatomy. And, we're moving towards a time now where people who are born intersexed are not assigned a sex at birth. The sex that they are assigned might be intersex. But in the past, people who were born with those diversity of genitals, that oftentimes parents would be asked, "Well, what do you want? Which sex do you want assigned to this baby?" And they would be forced to choose. And so that's the beginnings of sort of thinking about biological sex. Okay, so oftentimes people are assigned a particular biological sex at their point of birth, assigned either male biology or female biology. Gender identity is different. Gender identity has to do more with one's psychological or personal sense of oneself, okay? What your identity is. And so that regardless of what your sex is, that you might feel like a woman, or you might feel like a man. You might identify with that social category of woman, man, or you might feel like you're outside of woman, man, and that you are in some sort of non-binary sort of like your identity is like, hey, I don't really have a personal sense of being a woman or a man, right? I'm sort of either both of those things or none of those things, okay? And so gender identity is about one's personal sense of themselves. Now, if you are what is known as cisgender, that means that your gender identity corresponds with your biological sex. And so your biological sex is female and your sense of your gender identity is woman. And so that those are together, right? That they come in the close correspondence. That you are born with a penis and you are a male biologically, but and then you identify as the gender of man. Okay, that's cisgender. Transgender is where the gender identity does not correspond with one's biological sex. And so trans means up, away from, apart from. And so that when you think about like a transatlantic flight, you are flying from one area over the Atlantic Ocean to another area. The things are separated. And so trans is about being apart from each other. And so that if your biological sex is female, but your gender identity is you feel like a man, right? Well, then you transgender. If your biological sex is male, but you feel like a woman, then that would be an example of transgender. And also, gender is, it isn't just trapped in the binary of gender identity of woman or man. As we know, there are a plurality, many different genders that people can choose from. And so gender identity that doesn't correspond with like a masculine or feminine gender expression is oftentimes kind of referred to as either gender nonconforming or gender queer. That your identity is you don't identify according to a certain sort of gendered expectation or gendered expression, and so you find yourself in sort of a multiplicity of gendered positions. There are a lot of people that have come out as transgender, but these are two people that are, you've probably heard of. On the left-hand side is Caitlyn Jenner. She came out as a transgender woman in 2015 at the age of 65. You might know her from the Kardashian shows, which I haven't watched, but probably I should at some point. And prior to that, was an athlete, an Olympic athlete, and most recently ran for governor of the state of California. On the other side is Asia Kate Dillon. They are gender non-binary, and they're an actor in two TV series that I know of. One is Orange is the New Black, and one of my favorites, Billions, where they play Taylor Mason. So when Asia Kate Dillon has talked about their life, that they've talked about having a sense of, not having a specific gender identity, and then has had opportunities to play gender non-binary characters on TV, and that sort of, developed their own personal sense of being gender non-binary. So there's two people you might have heard of. All right, the last two things we're going to talk about are gender expression and gender roles. Gender expression is how somebody expresses their gender, okay? So if you feel like a woman or you feel like a man, then gender expression is how you sort of manifest that feeling to the world, right? And so that you feeling like masculine, femininity, dressing in a more feminine way, that could be an expression of one's gender identity, dressing in a more typically masculine way, suits, ties, what have you, that can be, a gender expression of one's gender identity. And so it's the qualities considered characteristic of women and men. Again, social constructs, but those are constructions, right? Men dress a certain way, women dress a certain way. But that gender expression can also come forth from a feeling of the gender identity of being gender non-binary, or not having a gender, or being gender queer, sort of a mixing of different genders, and so that the gender expression of a gender non-binary or gender queer are qualities that are considered characteristics of neither men or women or both. Okay, so bottom line, the gender expression is the way in which somebody expresses their gender identity to the world. Gender role are social expectations that are placed upon genders. And so gender role are the social expectations for how men and women should behave. But you could also say that gender role are expectations for how a transgender person or a non-binary person may behave. Okay. But just, keeping it to the gender roles as it relates to the gender roles of women and the gender roles of men. Here are some examples of the social expectations: that women should be the primary caretaker of children, and the president of the United States is a job that should be a man's job, right? And so that's that social expectation that's placed upon that. And finally, let's talk about sexual orientation. So, sexual orientation is one's physical attraction to other people, whether that's sexual in nature or just wanting to be physically close to somebody or emotionally close to somebody. And so that's what sexual orientation is. And so a person can be sexually attracted to somebody that shares the same gender as them. They can be sexually attracted to somebody who has the opposite gender of them. You could be sexually attracted to all genders. You could be sexually attracted to no genders. So when you hear the words gay or lesbian, that generally means that you are sexually attracted to somebody in your same, that shares your same gender identity. If you are straight, you are sexually attracted to somebody who has the opposite gender identity that you have. Bisexual often means that you are attracted to both men and women. That asexual, you're not attracted to anyone, that you're just not interested in sex. Pansexual, you're attracted to all genders, right? And so when you hear the words gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, etc., there we're talking about sexual orientation. Okay, so let's apply the concepts that we have been learning about: the concepts of biological sex, gender identity, gender roles, and sexual orientation. And so look at these statements and then ask yourself, which of those categories does this statement deal with? So I need to go to Planned Parenthood to get a pap smear or a testicular exam, or both a pap smear and a testicular exam. Keep in mind, a pap smear is when you get your cervix checked to see if it's healthy or not. So does that deal with biological sex, gender identity, gender roles, or sexual orientation? Well, it deals with biological sex because a pap smear looks at a person's cervix, and that's a biological anatomy. Testicular exam, it looks at your anatomy, your biology. And so that is best described as something having to do with biological sex. What about this one? When I see that person, it really makes my heart go pitter patter. I want to kiss them. Is that biological sex, gender identity, gender roles, or sexual orientation? If you guessed sexual orientation, you are correct, right? Sexual orientation is about the sexual attraction that you have to other people. Okay, so how about these scenarios? Do they deal with biological sex, gender identity, gender roles, or sexual orientation? As a man and a new father, I really want to take family leave to bond with my newborn, but I'm worried about how that's going to be perceived by my colleagues at work. Is that gender identity, biological sex, gender roles, sexual orientation? If you guess gender roles, you are correct, right? There's a societal expectation that it's women who stay with the kids, and if a man wants to take family leave, he might be seen as that is like outside of like societal gender roles. And then finally, I know I have a female body and female body parts, but I don't really feel like a woman. Is that gender identity, biological sex, gender roles, sexual orientation? If you said gender identity, that is correct. It's your psychological sense of your identity in terms of your gender. And I just did want to mention that that's where pronouns come into play. Pronouns are often associated with one's gender identity. So if you identify as a woman, you're likely to use she pronouns. Identify as a man, he pronouns. Identify in a non-binary capacity, use pronouns perhaps as they. Okay, I just wanted to add that in there as a point of information. All right, well, so we'll end this lecture by not looking at the gingerbread person, but the genderbread person. I'm sure some of you have seen this before. And so here is the genderbread person, that cookie. So at the top, let me put my magic pen on here. That if it's something you feel in your head, that is that your gender identity. If it's something going on down here, right, with your anatomy, that is biological sex. If it's something that's happening in your heart, and probably your head too, but your heart, that's the sexual orientation. And then here, how you are expressing these, all of these things, that is going to be your gender expression. Okay. I hope this lecture wasn't too clunky and that it made sense, but thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.